So for our next session here, we have quite a panel lined up for you, and we also have a late change to the agenda. Jaime Arsenault, the THPO for the White Earth Nation of Minnesota Chippewa, has injured herself and is not able to join us in a speaking capacity. We wish her a speedy recovery, and upholding her commitments as she does, she has found a substitute for us, and that is Cade Ferris, who's the THPO at Red Lake, one of her neighbors, I believe, in Minnesota. So we have a full panel here again, and hopefully another equally interesting session for you. I'm going to kind of frame the issue, and that includes letting you guys know that this is intended to be an open invitation to participate with us, to engage as you see fit, and to help us shape this initiative if we decide to proceed with it, if it's something that you want. So a couple of questions on that. Think about as we talk, is this something that would be useful to you and that you would engage with NATHPO on and helping these agency partners as well? Chris Koeppel is with the U.S. Forest Service. I also meant to have his title pulled up here for myself.
So I'm Assistant Director for the Office of Tribal Relations at the Forest Service in DC.
Thank you, Chris. And Ira Matt is formerly of ACHP. You all know him, you love him. He's now the Federal Preservation Officer with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. David Goldstein is with the Park Service. He is the, I believe, Northeast Regional Tribal Liaison. Yes. And Colleen Truskey is a term employee with the Park Service who has been working on this project with David. And then Cade Ferris is the late add to this session. And so we need to find and make and spotlight him as well. Shasta, if you could do that, I'm gonna keep talking here. Very nice. So what we've been doing internally at NATHPO is brushing up our own contact database, migrating it from Constant Contact to MailChimp. So those of you out there who are THPOs or THPO staff, if you're not hearing from me, things that you think you should be hearing from me, please check your spam folder and whitelist us, because MailChimp is what we prefer to use when we email hundreds of people at a time, and we get a lot of bounces. And poor Melissa has been up to her eyeballs in trying to clean up our contact database and get at least what we already had and what is easily accessible to us in the most useful format and function that it can be. But it's a full-time job, so know that that is underway. And also please help us by checking that and whitelisting us if you haven't already. So in order to have some dedicated resources to have a person working on this, the U.S. Forest Service, in the form of Chris Koeppel, very generously agreed to provide us some funding to work on that, which would be of mutual interest to them as well. And a project that I inherited is under an agreement that we already had with NRCS to develop consultation protocols and improve agreement document processes on ancestral lands with tribes. And so we're taking another run at that project since the funding was still there. And we've been very fortunate to be able to repurpose that funding last year, since we couldn't use it for travel to meetings as it was intended, to start working on this same project. Help us get in touch with you guys to help the Forest Service and NRCS as well. David Goldstein has been working on a GIS version of a contact database separately that NATHPO would be interested in partnering with them on. The details of that are yet to be ironed out. So that's one of the things that we want your input on if you're listening to this session. And Kate is going to provide us some tribal perspectives on what he hears from these good folks, questions that he may have, comments, red flags, and we want to hear from you whether you would be interested in participating with us on this. We don't want it to be another case of, you know, you're so used to this. Here's another contact database that we're going to create. Give us your information. We promise we'll keep it confidential this time and make it into something useful. We mean it. This is intended to be tribally driven. And so we want, at a minimum, to use NATHPO as a conduit to help make this the best that it can be. But in a best case scenario, you know, the sky's the limit, even more than that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to keep the ball rolling.
Thank you, Valerie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize if everyone hears my kids running around upstairs. You know how it is during the pandemic. So Office of Tribal Relations is in DC. Our director is named Reed Robinson, and he is formerly of the Park Service for 30 or so years, and now is with us as a director. And I wanted to talk about, just briefly, a master participating agreement that we have with NATHPO. And one reason we have an agreement with NATHPO is because central to everything that we do in the Forest Service Office of Tribal Relations is honoring and supporting sovereignty and encouraging our leadership and training our leadership in taking trust responsibility seriously and honoring government to government consultation. So we're working with our heritage group, who are the ones that are in charge of 106 consultation. And then on OTR, our side, we kind of do consultation writ large. We do national consultation, we do large controversial projects, things like that. And so we also do consultation collaboration on landscape scale restoration, partnerships. So we see this agreement as a conduit to fund anything that enhances consultation. And that's what the agreement says. Those are the sideboards. It doesn't have to be 106 consultation. We could be consulting about sacred sites that have no cultural resources component. We could be talking about restoring a spring. We could be talking about anything, as long as it enhances consultation. Some of the things we can use this agreement for with Valerie is to fund travel of tribal elders, THPOs, THPO staff, to enter into consultation with a forest or a region within the Forest Service, to make it easier to travel, to provide some funds for that. But also it's projects like this. And I just want to reiterate what Valerie said is, although we are providing some funding and will do so in the future, we are not in the driver's seat at all. Unlike some of the other databases that you may be used to, where they're basically owned, managed by the federal agency. That's not what we want. What we want is something that is managed and owned by the THPOs through NATHPO, because, you know, our leadership to be able to quickly connect with the right THPO for the right circumstances is something that enhances meaningful consultation for us. That's all I have to say. I just welcome everybody. I thank you for the opportunity to talk today, and I will leave it at that.
Good stuff, Chris. I think I'm next, so I'm just going to start talking. My name's Arsenault. Good day. Quick background on me. As a former THPO, Confederated, Salish, and Kootenai tribes, I know my replacement is out here in virtual land somewhere, Katie McDonald. So good to see you participating. As Valerie noted, I was with the Advisory Council and spent a lot of good years there working with Valerie Hauser, Reed Nelson. And just a couple months ago, I switched gears. I'm with the NRCS now. I'm the Federal Preservation Officer. So, you know, I guess from our agency's perspective, she said, you know, we're involved with this. There's a funding agreement. For those of you who've been around NATHPO for a while, you remember NRCS came to you 5-6 years ago, developing an ancestral lands document, basically an intro guide for their agency on what their staff needs to do to consult with Indian tribes. I was part of a working group at the time, along with several other tribal members. It was back when Bambi Kraus was around, and some NRCS staff. That was NRCS's first swing at it. They wanted to get the document out there, kind of take away the excuses from their staff, get them something to really help them get oriented with the fact that, yes, you have to talk to tribes. The second part of that Valerie noted was there was another agreement, came with some money, and it was to basically get tribes and NRCS staff together, develop some consultation protocols, learn from each other, start to build that bridge of understanding, especially was focused on ancestral lands because it was meant to allow folks to travel so you could meet the staff in the states that you weren't currently residing in and get a familiarity with the people that were there, get a familiarity with the processes, but also, and I think most importantly at the time, was so that the NRCS staff could learn from you. It was a great opportunity, but I think it was presented at the same NATHPO that the NRCS FPO retired after, and I believe that was Bambi Kraus's last hurrah as well. So the agreement languished for a bit, COVID happened, and now we're still in COVID. So the concept of funding people to meet face to face, not the best idea. So we were working around with NATHPO trying to find ways to repurpose this. We see that the Forest Service developing a contact database, heck, we're right along with that. But I think for our half, I ran across this guy, Mr. Goldstein. He's carrying a computer and a purpose in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he started talking about this database system. And I think you guys are going to see there's nothing too special about it, right? We've all seen these databases before. FCC had their TCNS database, HUD has theirs. But I think what Chris Koeppel was saying kind of hit the nail on the head. This was one, it's a great tool, and you'll hear some more about it from the Park Service personnel, but it's something the Park Service needed to find a home for. NATHPO seems to be a great home for that. And this group that was already working together, that's kind of how we got going with this. We started talking. I, of course, worked for my tribe for 15 years. And some of what really resonated with me when I seen this was finally getting a database. And it's a tool. It's not as complex and as exciting as all these other things that we've been talking about with landscapes and NAGPRA. It's really a foundational tool, but it's absolutely necessary because in my experience as THPO and at the Advisory Council, and as so many people here know, it doesn't matter if you want to talk about a landscape if you're not even offered a seat at the table. And the reason you're not invited, there's a number of reasons. Maybe the agency personnel doesn't really know what they're doing. Maybe they don't have the best personality. I'll leave it at that. But it's also unfortunate that the databases that are out there aren't controlled by tribes. Those as well, despite the regulations stating that it's the federal agency's job to seek out Indian tribes, they have databases that still make the tribes go to them, populate their databases under their terms and conditions. Doesn't seem like the most effective way for this to go forward. So as we've been talking about this database that the Park Service has, and really, to be honest, the money that the NRCS and the Forest Service have, create an opportunity where we can move this tool to not really a neutral location, but a tribally centered location there that the tribes can control. As Chris was saying, it allows you to exercise your own sovereignty. It allows the tribes to come together, and you guys are able to unite in your front, but you still maintain all your individuality in this. And the big thing is you flip the script, what we've been talking about. Now agencies are coming to you guys to seek that information. The way it is in the regulations and the way that it should be, it creates kind of a whole different persona. So we've talked about it a few times. And what's nice about it, like I said, the tool's been created. There are some funds available from a couple agencies. And to be honest, you've seen it the other day, the memo from the current administration reaffirming tribal consultation. I wouldn't call it a perfect storm because I see our participants up here. We're not the best group of people, but there's a lot of circumstances here that are good. And I was laughing earlier at the comments I seen about how you guys feel about some of the other databases out there. I'm not going to bring them up and say them, but you know, I understand that sentiment. I think I still might be listed under HUD's database as the THPO for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, and it's been a few years since I've been there. So we're here, and we really just wanted to put this information out there, kind of give you a quick background on why the parties that are here. And then after, you know, David and Colleen go, we want to hear what you guys think about this, how it could be crafted, how we as agencies could support this if you guys think this is a good tool to move forward with. So with that, I'm just going to say lem. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Ira. David and Colleen.
Sure. Hi. Good afternoon. Good morning to some of you. I am, you know, very happy that the Forest Service and NRCS both are interested in working with this for the Park Service. The situation that I found myself in becoming an American Indian liaison here in this agency and in this part of the agency in the colonial East is one that has been pretty sobering, particularly about communication and the communications that relate to emergency. I'm allowed to say climate crisis now again after 4 years of being under a gag rule. But I have spent some time trying to find ways to answer managers' calls in parks and for programs that the Park Service runs to help connect tribal nations with Park Service staff, to help decision makers work with tribes to consult. And these things that Ira mentions, the databases that the agencies are not in the business of keeping phone books. We're terrible at phone books. We don't do that very well. They require people to keep them up to date, and the agencies aren't ever going to dedicate the kind of resource to do it. So in lieu of that, what we started to do was say, fine, but what we can do is create architecture to house information if it came our way. So if BIA actually did something to keep its data up, and if the FCC, which doesn't, of course, share across other agencies, was allowed to share it, where would it go? And when we are in the situation that, you know, the tsunami rises up and the ancestral lands are hit, and there are ancestors in front of us that we have to communicate with the nations about, because those things are in harm's way. How do we get to that point of communicating as fast as possible? Deepwater Horizon scenario for the inland oil spill program demonstrated that reaching out to the tribes was actually something that happened late and almost, in most cases, last. However, if you work with the emergency folks who do inland oil spill, they will tell you that the tribes are the first who are supposed to be notified. That's the first piece. I think we heard from Koeppel at the beginning yesterday about people showing up for EPA action and having, or for FCC action, and using the ancestral lands and the sacred sites as a set down for construction. This is exactly the kind of situation that we would like to continue to mitigate and avoid at all costs. And if we had information that we could put into a much more reflective data set that showed and allowed us to image where ancestral lands are and know who to contact when we are in sacred eagle habitat, when we are on sacred waters, and when we are near ancestors' resting places, that would be really helpful for us. And it would get us out of the space of continuing, years of genocidal practice that we'd like to get out of. So I'm hoping to show here with my colleague Colleen, who is the sort of queen of my database world. She has built a thing, I think, and I think she can talk a little bit about what the architecture relates to and what its thinking is or where it comes from. But the problem with the architecture is that it doesn't have contact information and it doesn't have a place where we can source ancestral lands data. And that's what we're asking NATHPO to help us support to construct. Colleen, is that fair? Does that sound like the ask? That sounds like the ask. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Can everyone hear me okay?
No.
No. Not hear me.
I can hear you, but you sound chipmunky.
Okay.
It's staticky and echoey, Colleen.
Try putting headphones in and sometimes. Okay.
Oh dear. That's not better.
Call out, come back in. Just dial out to come in.
I'll be right back. Sorry about this.
While she's on her way back in, I was looking at some more of the chat, and I think it was Mary Ellen Walsh. You were talking about what you guys had in Arizona, and that's exactly something that we had talked about. There's a lot of great examples out there of systems that work, and like what you guys have in Arizona, the tribes basically lay out what's the process, who do you contact. They're able to put in what information they want. That's a lot of what this could be. And we've seen, that's what we're saying, it exists out there. It's just finding something that we can have, I think, national in scope, hopefully. And from my perspective, it's what I always say, it's just, I guess NATHPO is already such a great resource for people. If this does get more, steam, and people go with it, and it does become a source, it's not the only place people are going to go for this information. It's just another tool in the toolbox. But I think it'll continue to remove that excuse that some federal agencies have of, we didn't know who to contact. We didn't know which tribe had an interest in this area. We hear that too often. And like I said, sometimes it's a genuine concern where people have just never interacted with Indian tribes, have done cultural resources, they have this world of regulations to deal with. And other times it's a claim of ignorance. But I think if we can have this tool out there that does get the steam behind it that TCNS had, but that was very unique to their agency. And we've seen what happened when an agency had control of something and then deconstructed everything around it. TDAD has that same intent, but it just never got off the ground. this could be something then that we can point to, that the ACHP can point to, SHPOs can point to and say, hey, I don't know what your problem was in identifying the appropriate tribe at the appropriate time in the process. So we're not brought in, I guess I'm a Fed now, so you're not brought in at the 11th hour when everything's done and they say, hey, take a look at this agreement, do you want to sign it? So
Colleen, are you back? Are you alive again? Are you back?
I'm here.
Oh, that's
sorry.
good. Okay.
Do I sound better?
Yes.
You sound like a human. That's good.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully that's the only hiccup that we will encounter, but it is tech and I am working from my apartment and that's how it goes. So first of all, before I share my screen, I just want to introduce myself quickly. My name is Colleen Truskey. I am an interdisciplinary GIS specialist with the Northeast Regional Office of Tribal and Cultural Affairs of the National Park Service. And I originally got involved in this project. Ira talked about it a little bit, David talked about it a little bit, when we were thinking about connecting the right people in federal agencies to the right people in tribal governance, specifically in the context of emergency planning and response at the behest of the Inland Oil Spill Preparedness Program, which is a program situated within the Department of Interior. So that was kind of the ask, you know, when you're in a situation, you have a federal on-scene coordinator who potentially has a lot of experience working with tribes, working within the specific area, or perhaps doesn't have any of that, is unfamiliar with the area and unfamiliar with the communities. So we wanted to see what it would take to create a sort of bite off a piece of this problem with emergency response and see what we could do using existing tech and operating within existing realities of the way that federal agencies interact with one another, share data or don't share data, and how we presently interact with tribal communities, for better or for worse. So we looked at a number of other similar applications and started realizing the room for opportunity with something like the demo application that we were working on, the architecture. You know, the National Park Service, where I sit, is tasked with a unique mandate among federal agencies for being responsible for cultural resources, which has a very amorphous definition. And especially when it comes to cultural resources for tribal nations, we know that that cross-cuts with natural resources a lot of the time. And additionally, with IOSPP being the source for this ask, being situated in that emergency response. So that definitely, we have to build in enough sort of complexity into the application to accommodate for a variety of emergency scenarios, though with a focus on, obviously, inland oil spills. So we had sort of this more expansive mandate that we wanted to take the opportunity to do and build something that puts people in touch quickly and effectively and reduces the burden of repeated asks for same or similar information by federal agencies onto tribal governments. So that was sort of the goal. We wanted to see what we could do to minimize repeat requests. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen and we're going to hope for the best. And all right, let's see. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Yes, excellent. All right. And I would love to minimize you guys. There we go. Okay, so what we are looking at here is sort of the basic application. And we knew it had to be spatially based, and we knew that we had to sort of actually make sure that we were visualizing that space, that we weren't just providing a list of areas of interest, that we weren't just providing a list of, you know, counties or something like that. We had to create that common space that we could share. And we chose counties as the basis for what we're calling maximum area of potential interest. And we chose counties for a couple of reasons. One, We have good data on counties, but also counties offer sort of a protective measure. So we don't want exact boundaries. We don't want to know where those sacred sites are. We just want to know that if something happens in a specific area, that we can get somebody to reach out appropriately and determine, hey, you have expressed interest in this county, for example. Something has happened at this point in this county. Is that near a sacred site? Do we have to have that conversation and go ahead and put people in touch for that purpose? So really think about it as that protective measure, and also going beyond the questions of, you know, this isn't just about what happens on trust land or reservation land. This is really sort of landscape level that we're talking about here. So to that end, obviously you don't see anything, but once you start interacting with the data, that's where things get fun. So here, for example, based on data, and once again, this is dummy data, demo data, not to be taken seriously. But to date, for example, we have 6 tribal nations that have expressed Bremer, Iowa in their maximum area of potential interest. And then you can go ahead and view those tribal nations. And from there as well, then you would go ahead and access information. And of course, we don't have any of that right now. But that's sort of the basic how that would work. And then we also went ahead and decided to structure, as you saw in that. So here's a different one. It's going to go. Focusing in on emergency contacts, primary cultural resource contacts, primary natural resource contacts. And so we structured the actual contact portion of it to sort of highlight different statutes and responsibilities, and visualize and express how these complex legal landscapes interact with the spaces themselves, recognize the overlap, and accommodate different government size and different government structure. So I've included some dummy data to actually demonstrate how that works. And we've also added in federally managed lands for context, in addition to BIA's land area representations for tribal communities. So you can see that as well. And if you were to zoom in further, we also have waterways included. So just some examples of things that could be thrown in here. But for example, in Grafton, New Hampshire, 1 tribal nation, Demo Nation A. And here we have, they don't have an emergency contact listed, but they do have a THPO office listed. There's space for specific responsibilities, space to add additional notes, such as when are you in the office, or use a different extension, or truly whatever, you know, the sky's the limit really in what you could add. So inclusion of space to link to websites if you have potential caches of, say, space for your programmatic agreements with different federal agencies, want those to be quickly accessible. Or if you have other GIS applications that are specific to your nation and want to link to those instead. So we have this sort of generalized maximum area of potential interest, and then really drill down based on specific tribal nation needs. So as desired, or don't have to include any of that at all. And so a couple of other things that I wanted to point out here. We have office, phone, email. You'll notice we don't have a name and we don't have a mailing address. And those were deliberate decisions. One, we understand that staff turnover happens frequently. It happens frequently in federal agencies as well. And so we felt it was more productive to include general office information as opposed to specific individualized information. That would make sure that this data remains relevant for a longer period of time, while also making sure that based on specific requests, you could then get to the right person by picking up the phone. And because it's situated in emergency response, generally speaking, you're not going to send a letter in an emergency scenario, but also for other asks or potential asks that might be coming from federal agencies, one of the things that we wanted to highlight here was picking up the phone and calling somebody or sending an email, as opposed to sending a formal letter and then waiting the 30 days and whatnot, really focusing more on what would it take to help build a relationship. What would it take to minimize perhaps the burden of getting specific asks? We don't want people being crushed by Section 106 requests, for example. So that's something that we wanted to factor in there as well. Really give tribes the ability to respond and determine, hey, yes, send us a letter regarding this request. That is actually something we're interested in based on the more details that you've provided on the project. Something along those lines. So having that information in there. And so then as well, what you can do is query this data. So I'm sure you guys have explored other applications. And one of the things that was really important to me when I was planning this and working with other folks who were thinking about this is, how do we make it easier to actually visualize information? So for example, we have a querying functionality, and you can select one tribe, or if you are operating in a confederacy, you can select multiple tribes and then visualize what that actually looks like. So for example, here in our demo nation, we are going to go ahead and throw up demo nation A, for example. Hit apply, and here we go. So this represents all of the different counties that demo nation A has expressed interest in. And what we can see from this list, obviously, is, all right, we have Grafton, Sullivan, New Hampshire, but what we see visually is, all right, here we have all of these counties, and then we also have a whole. And now we can ask, all right, is that intentional? Is that an error in the data? Was that an error of input? Does it need to be corrected? So really making that as easy as possible, and then also being able to export the data as well. So you can export it to a CSV file, have that county information, have all the contact information in one single Excel spreadsheet that you can then open up as well and edit as needed. And additionally, we also wanted to emphasize the ability to identify potential tribal partners. So we have sort of these spatial features. So say, for example, if you're a federal manager or a federal on-scene coordinator, depending on your needs. For this example, I'm going to pretend I'm working with White Mountains National Forest. And we have different options that we can then select by. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to select here. I could apply buffer, but I don't want to in this instance. I'm going to hit apply. And now here I am getting different nations as well. So we have Demo Nation A, but we also have Demo Nation C has expressed interest in the counties that overlap the area that I've just selected. Once again, I can export that information and go ahead and start reaching out to people and making those phone calls based on what we're dealing with here. And based on the specific responsibility, so I know that I'm reaching out to the right people based on the specific request that I have in mind or the question that I need answered. And potentially that's something that we could also do in reverse based on maximum area of potential interest. Who are the federal agencies that are within that landscape? Something along those lines. So then the other strong point that I wanted to emphasize here is the actual editing of the information. So we wanted to make sure that not only could batch edits be enabled, but also one-time edits. Just go ahead, a phone number's changed, an email's changed, you need to add a county to your area of interest, you need to remove a county from your area of interest. How do we do that in such a way so that you're not waiting 6 months for the next update, and actually put that power in your hands to go ahead and edit that data? So for example, in the example that I just listed, Demo Nation A, this county was missing, Merrimack, New Hampshire. And so if we want to add that, we can go ahead and just go right in through here. And I want to add that Demo Nation A. And just to double check myself, I have to write it out as well. For Merrimack, New Hampshire. save. And that has now been added to the data set and will reflect in the non-editable public-facing application. And because of the way that we've structured the data, you don't have to go in and add that contact information again. It automatically applies. And if I were to update this, so demo notes, go ahead, hit save for that. That's also going to be applied to all of the different counties that we would select. So really sort of being able to push those immediate edits, make batch edits as needed, and take advantage of the different applications that we have through our GIS online. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Go back in here and just wrap this up by emphasizing, you know, we wanted to focus on building a simple, sustainable, accessible architecture. So there is no custom anything in this. This is all existing ArcGIS abilities and taking advantage of existing architecture, because we didn't want to get 3 years down the line and have people be like, I have no idea how to operate the SQL database, for example. So finding that common denominator that allows federal agents and tribal governments to situate themselves in a shared space and be proactive about partnering and relationship building for whatever the situation might be. So that was sort of what we came up with, and recognize that, you know, there's a lot that could potentially be done to improve, and just interested in hearing what the feedback is. But thank you. And I'm really glad that my mic was able to work and I was able to share that with you guys.
Thank you, Colleen. It looks like we've been getting a lot of great comments and questions in the chat box there. I want to keep encouraging folks to enter questions as you have them, and that way they're queued up for us for if we have time at the end to hopefully address some of them. I'm going to turn it over to Cade for your reactions to this, questions, thoughts, red flags, and then I want to circle back around and make sure that we address the climate change initiative nexus with this as well. And I might put you on the spot for that, and David.
All right. Well, thank you. My name is Cade Ferris. I'm a Historic Preservation Officer at Red Lake Nation in Minnesota. I'm Turtle Mountain Chippewa, Manitoba Métis Federation citizen, and I've been working in the THPO system since back in 1994. I was part of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe's initial application to be the third THPO in America, and my own tribe, we were the 20th THPO, so I've been doing this since 1994. So quite a while, I guess, what, 26 years. The database is great. I guess the only thing that I was thinking about as you're doing it is while we're looking at, you know, potential Aboriginal territory and historical range, we're ignoring treaty as a I guess a layer or a factor, because, well, having a historical interest in an area is one thing. Treaty interest is getting into more of that legal, modern aspect. A treaty interest supersedes a historical Aboriginal interest in an area. You know, because there's legal issues surrounding that. So a project that might affect an area, a tribe might have been there historically in the 1700s, but a tribe might have, you know, had a treaty signed in the 1860s, and still to this day are dealing with issues of getting land back, of resources, and those type of things. So making sure that federal agencies understand treaties and the importance of the treaties. It's not just generic, because not every treaty is the same, and not every treaty interest is going to be the same. But you see a lot of that happen where we've had projects where we don't get notified, and this project happened in a treaty area. and they used another tribe to, you know, well, we consulted with a tribe, but it's like you didn't consult with, you know, the proper tribe who had the most pressing interest. Then the other issue overall is, as a THPO, your point of contact. Sending a letter to the THPO or contacting the THPO is not government to government consultation or government to government interaction. So if I get a letter and I don't respond in 30 days, that's not the end all be all. If a project is important, it requires interaction with the tribal council, the real decision makers. In a sense, we're no different than, say, you know, a Secretary of Interior or a cabinet member who can provide information to the government, but that at the end of the day, the tribal government has to have that that input to make a meaningful comment or decision, especially if treaty information or a treaty land might be affected. And so I think that a database like this is great, but you know, we've had federal agencies consulting with, say, 30 different tribes for a project that happened on the reservation here. And yet this reservation has never been ceded by the Red Lake Nation. It was never a reservation that was set aside by an executive order. It's just homeland. And so that's offensive to the tribal government. That why would, you know, the FCC be contacting, you know, 30 tribes before they can, you know, do this, when the real decision maker for that land is the tribe, is the Red Lake Nation government. And that, I think, is a real issue that has to be looked at, because there's not just this massive, you know, area of consultation. We have 6 tribes to consult in this area. It's much more nuanced. And if an agency is going to use this data, we can't allow that agency to rely on this and say, well, we've used this and this is the endpoint and this is the our consultation database. We have to consult because A, B, C, or D. It's like, well, no, you have to talk to the tribe how the tribe wants to be consulted. You have to look at where the tribe wants to be consulted in general or in specific. And I'm not sure how that can be adequately reflected on the database. It's a great database. It looks really cool, and I think it's an excellent you know, step, because right now, yeah, there's a National Park Service database, there's HUD database, TCNS had a database, and the BIA has their contact database. And so I don't know how you get around that. I'm not sure that it can be solved, especially when you look at how a lot of the federal agencies do work. When they spend more time consulting with and interacting with their applicant before they actually reach out to a tribe. And when they do, like I said, it might be that they've already made decisions that would, you know, potentially be a treaty issue, not even a Section 106 issue, not a consultation issue, but a real issue that might deal with wild rice, that might deal with logging interests or mineral interests or water rights. So that needs to be seriously considered going forward.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for that feedback. It touches on a lot of issues that I think are inherent to the relationship between the federal government and tribal nations, and trying to represent that adequately within an architecture is definitely a big ask. But, you know, as well, those are layers that could potentially be added on. So like the United States Forest Service has their, I can't remember the name of the application right now, but it includes session data.
Yeah, Tribal Connections Viewer. This is Chris, Colleen.
Yes.
I can assist with this.
Okay.
So with the Tribal Connections Viewer, which is a partnership between us and the Park Service and EPA, and by the way, we put a huge caveat on this, that this is just a planning tool. It's not to determine areas of interest for tribes, but what it does do is it maps out the historic treaty boundaries. The actual session numbers are there. And so you can see federal property, modern tribal property. This does not extend up to Alaska, by the way, only in the lower 48. And session lines. And you can click on the session and it'll bring up the information for the historic treaty, plus a PDF of the actual historic treaty. The reason we're doing this is because we're very interested in knowing what are treaty rights associated with different forests and training our decision makers in understanding that as well. Again, though it's not perfect because it's based on historic data, it's going to have some problems, but it's a planning tool. And we have found for all the tools that we put out there, that caveat is so important. This is not the only step that you need to take to determine who to consult with.
Yeah, and then now in Indian Claims Commission maps, I see that sometimes those get trotted forward.
And hopefully, possibly, we'll plan to provide a space to do that this year. Garrett, thank you for your comment. And thank everyone for your comments and questions. These are all valid points and issues and concerns that deserve attention, that haven't gotten the attention they deserve up to this point with any resources that exist. And if we're going to do this, we want to do it the right way. And that is the intent of this session, to introduce the topic and gauge your reactions to it. So thank you for posting them here. She has to be sure and save the chat box for us again. So I'm not really sure how to wrap up here, other than just to reiterate what everyone has said up to this point, that we're still in the very, very early preliminary conversations with the partners in this session. And it's something that needs to be done. If you've ever tried to use the THPO search directory on NATHPO's webpage, I will tell you that it's something we need to redo anyway. And that does not have areas of interest. It just lists THPOs by state. And now that we have draft one of our new website, it's not even working as well as it was before. So we're still on the search for a new webmaster there. But this is something that we recognize as an opportunity to possibly work together on something that all of us here have either been working on separately or planning to, or talking about, or recognizing a need. And so I'll just say that you'll hear from us again. We will seriously consider your comments and questions and concerns here, and look forward to discussing this further with you. I think this is something that we can work through at a minimum to produce a resource that is more useful and appropriate than what currently exists with the parties that we have on the team at this point. And so I'll leave it there. I'm hopeful, but I'm an eternal optimist. So thank you, everyone, for speaking, for your time today, offering your thoughts, and I believe your open hearts and good spirits on this project. And we look forward to continuing to have discussions with you on the panel about it, and with everyone who is listening as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Valerie. Thank you so much, Ira.
Sometimes, everyone.
Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
So